of them actually. So last Saturday of the month, we always do testimony night. I'll introduce our guest in a little bit. Danny's going to come up and share our values, what we believe as a church. They're here on the sides, but for those at home, you won't be able to see that. And then we'll have a quick introduction, and we'll go ahead and get into the message. And keep in mind, afterwards, we're going to do something a little different. Rather than the usual break out into groups, it's a small enough crowd present today that we're going to go and have the food and fellowship together over in the pavilion. So we have quite a bit more food than we need. So please don't don't skip that part, because I need to get rid of that food. But come on up, Danny, and I appreciate you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Danny.
One thing I did remember on the way here, we didn't make it here by luck. We made it here by God's grace and glory. We got to remember that all the time. But some of the things that we go through here at Recovery Church, some of the values that we find important to us as a group is, first of all, unity. All are welcome. There is unity in our diversity, and we are entitled to share solutions. We are entitled with the church and all 12-step fellowships. We are the church. We are for the recovery. We will encourage the recovery family to be active in both. Recovery. We do recover from addiction and grow to help others. God's purpose is for Jesus to live in us and through us. We have the freedom to live an abundant, sober life. Jesus. Jesus is our hope. He is with us, and therefore the bedrock of our faith. The Bible. The Bible is the inspired word of God and reveals the divine standards for what we believe, teach, and do. Service. Service. We joyfully serve and carry the message of faith and recovery, because faith without works is dead. Community. We value and are part of the greater community, and therefore work with people, organizations, and churches to help serve others in and out of recovery. The steps. We work and believe in the 12 steps because they embody many of the Bible's core teachings and will lead a person closer to God. Rotation. We serve with a spirit of rotation, with humility at the center of all our efforts. Prayer. We believe in prayer because prayer is powerful and convicts us with God. Connects. Recovery Church is raw, unrefined, and authentic, allowing us to take faith-filled risks that almost always involve change. Discipleship. The more we give faith and recovery away, the more we receive. We do not do this alone because we recover together. We see both sponsorship and discipleship as essential to our way. Love. Finally, we will be known for our love. In Recovery Church, what our big thing is here is the founder of Recovery Church. His idea is recovering addicts and alcoholics to teach other alcoholics and addicts how to get out of that spot where they are in. And that's the way we like to do things. And would you like to bring up the... Hopefully we do it.
Oh, I got my own theme song. I like it. So, quite an intro. I feel like I should have a cape on or something after that. So, again, I thank you all for being here. I'd just like to have another prayer before we bring David up. And so, just Father, on this day when we begin to look at this season, as we enter into Passover this evening and Palm Sunday tomorrow, and Easter next week, the Resurrection Sunday, Lord, that we remember the root of all things, and Lord, that you are the creator of all things and that you have blessed us so richly. So I, again, pray that you be on this time and be with David as he brings the message, Lord, and thank you in Jesus' name. Before I bring David up, and thank you for reminding me, I just want to tell you that we are a self-supporting church. And so everything that we do, everything that is supported by those that give to us either online through our website or here in person as Danny gets ready to pass the plate around. Nobody here takes a penny. Everything collected goes to help people in need, whether it be, as we've got clothes back there for someone who's coming that is early in recovery that needs clothing, the Bibles, the food that we're about to serve. All of that is supported by you. And so that's what your money goes to, as well as the things it costs to put this on each week. So let me give you a little quick intro to David. We have some common history, but I've known David since 2008. We met when I was working at a treatment center called Lamb of God Recovery Centers out in Okeechobee. And David had some people that he brought to us that were working through his services. And David has also some other similar background. I'll let him go into all of that. But today being Passover seems quite appropriate for all of that. So if those of you that don't know, at 7:36, sundown tonight, begins Passover. Passover was the time when the Israelites were instructed by God to use the blood of a lamb over their doorpost so that they would be saved from the wrath that was to come over Egypt for them holding back the Israelites. And so, funny thing is, Israelites are hearing from God to take the blood of a lamb and paint it over the doorpost, and this is somehow supposed to save their firstborn sons, and they did it. I don't know about you, but when God tells me to go, first of all, get the blood of anything, I got to make sure, is that really God I'm hearing from? I have a tendency when God speaks to me to sometimes question if it's God or not, because sometimes he asks me to do things that don't make sense to me. But thankfully, when we do listen to him, there's a salvation that comes through it. And there's a protection that comes through it as well, and he blesses us through it. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we think about God's word today and what Passover meant, and it's something that Jesus was observing as he prepared to become the ultimate Passover lamb for us. But with that, I bring up Dave, my good friend. Dave is one of the guys that I can call at any time and say anything, and he doesn't judge me on it. He hears me out, and I can be me, and I can call him and complain and beef and moan and cuss and kick a little, and he still loves me anyway. So come on up, Dave. Thank you for being here.
Take this off.
You can pin that on you if you want.
I can.
You can.
It's been a long time since anything was pinned on me. My name's David. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and believe it or not, can you hear me at the back? Louder? How's that?
Older.
How about that? Is that on? No. Yeah, I'm going to need some help turning this on. Where is the on? Somebody want to switch this on for me? Hello?
We got Danny will come set you up.
There you go. That's what I need. In the meantime, while we're getting set up, because I'm not, where is the on switch on that thing? It's on now. You can hear me now, correct?
Oh, yeah.
All right, my name's David. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and it's Passover, and I'm Jewish, and here I am. But I happen to be a Messianic Jew, and that's one of the things I have in common, I believe, with Lyle. And what that means is that Jesus is the Messiah in my life, even though I practice Judaism. And that's an important part of my background. I would tell you, I was thinking about Adam this morning. I started my day off at getting up about 5:30 this morning and speaking to a group of people in England over Zoom. And so I got some practice into what I was going to say tonight a little bit this morning, which was a good thing. And I was thinking about Adam. A little girl is in school, and she says to the teacher, she asked him about Adam, and she said, tell me about Adam's children. And she said, well, Adam's kid went to Adam and said, Adam, how come we don't live in the Garden of Eden anymore? And Adam looked at Eve, and he looked back at the children. He said, well, your mother ate us out of house and home. And that's the story of addiction. The first story of addiction for me is when Adam and God walk in the Garden of Eden. God says you can do anything you want, but you can't do that one thing. And of course Adam and Eve, they eat from the tree of knowledge. And God comes down, he says three things to Adam. He says, Adam, where are you? You'd think if he was God, he would know where Adam is. But the truth of the matter is, when I pick up a drink, everything changes in my life. You will not recognize me. My whole character changes. I am a different person. It's the one thing I can't do. And the second thing is, God says, is Adam, why are you covered up like that? Well, that's the next thing I do. You know, I cover up all my tracks. I don't want you to know how I got to where I am or what I've been doing. And the third thing he says is, why'd you do it? And Adam said, the woman you gave me made me do it. That's the story of addiction from day one. So the truth of the matter is, we've all been addicts ever since this started. From the very first man and woman, we have been in the throes of addiction. And I can tell you that this is a very special time for me because it's Passover. And as a child, I would spend it with my family. And my mother, at 12 years old, was living in Poland. And she got out of Poland in 1938 as the war was started. And they wouldn't let her parents out. And her whole family died in the concentration camps. So my mother did the Passover. She left. And she got out. But the others stayed and they died. And that's part of what Lyle was talking about just before, in the fact that some of us are covered and some of us are not. You know, it's a matter of who we are and what we do. My mother at 12 years old traveled across Europe on her own, literally on her own, and got to England. And she talks about being at a train station in Berlin and changing trains and seeing families being torn apart at 12. So my mother was an orphan and my father was the youngest of 10 children of a businessman. So my father had everything done for him because he was the baby of the family, and my mother was an orphan who did everything for herself. And then I came along. So you've got this very dysfunctional triangle of me being the only child and my father and my mother. They sent me to a Catholic elementary school, for those of you that have been to Catholic school, which was fun. They then sent me to a Church of England high school, an Anglican high school, which was even less fun. Of course, I mentioned they were dysfunctional. So I went to all these different religious schools, and yet, what I really got out of this was I got a real understanding of what God is and what God isn't. And God is many things, many different things to many different people. And although I can't put a face on God, I know what God is. I know the character of God. I know he's kind, I know he's loving, I know he's caring. And one of the things that God did for me was he created me an alcoholic. And the reason I believe he created me an alcoholic was because he knew that if he didn't use something to get on my knees, to bring me to my knees, to ask him for help, that I would never do that. And alcohol literally brought me to my knees. And I've learned through bitter experience that if you don't get on your knees and ask God for help, he will bring you to your knees. And I see it time and time and time again with people with addictions and alcoholism. Today, you know, the reading today, if you go through the Bible day by day, is about Samuel. You know, and Samuel is born, and he's the one that God goes out to, and he's in the temple, and he's told, when God arrives, say, God, here I am. And that's what we're told to do in recovery. We're told to be that person. That when somebody reaches out, we are responsible for putting out that hand. And that hand is where God turns up. When I am in commune, when I am working with a sponsee, when I am working with another alcoholic or an addict, that's where God is. He turns up right there in that relationship. I was drinking at school at the age of 12, and in my high school, we had an assembly hall where we had church every day. In fact, every day from when I was 3 years old till when I was 18, when I left high school, I was at church every day. I was at school because schools in England, it was mandatory. And so I had school every day, and what we would do is when we were at school sometimes we would drink. and we would go hide in the it was one of these old assembly halls where they had an organ loft, and we would hide in the organ loft. And when we were too lazy to go to the bathroom, or we couldn't get down there because there was teachers, we'd go to the bathroom. We'd pee in the organ pipes. And so the very next day, when they would play the hymns in assembly the next morning, and they'd hit one of those notes, you'd hear this gurgle, gurgle, and everybody in the whole school knew we'd been hiding up there drinking. And then they'd start hunting for the bottles and the guys. So, you know, we got caught a few times that way. I went through high school, I got into college, and during college, I was recruited into a political organization because of my mother's background. And I have to tell you that at high school, prior to that, in England, you could go to a pub and walk into a pub at 14 years old. So I played rugby, and where we would change buses going to the rugby fields, it was at a pub. It was in the bus terminal was in the forecourt of a pub. So we would go in there on the way back from rugby, and at 16 you could buy your own beer. So at 14 somebody could buy us a drink that was called shandy. It was a mixture of beer and Sprite, I guess you'd call it. But at 16 you could buy your own beer. At 18 I could buy my own alcohol, and at 17 I got a driver's license. So by the time I was 17, 18, going into college, I could already buy legally hard liquor, and I already had a driver's license, and I was a full-blown alcoholic. And you know, that's how I went through college. I went through college drinking. And there are other things other than alcohol in my story. There's cocaine and there's heroin in my story, because it made sense to me at some point in my adult life that when I found cocaine, that I could actually drink longer and more of it. And then of course at some point I needed to get to sleep, so heroin helped me come down off of that. So, you know, I was my own pharmacist. What more could you want? Life was good at that point in time. Of course, it didn't last very long. You know, and I'm grateful for the fact of those drugs that brought me to my end very quickly, brought me to my knees. I was thinking about how this all ended. So in 1976, I was blown across the room by the IRA. For those of you that don't know who the IRA is, it's the Irish Republican Army. And so now I've got all these resentments. I've got all these resentments against Germans. I've got the resentments against the Irish. I got the resentments against the Anglicans in school and the Catholics that I went to school with. You know, I have all of these resentments against these whole groups of people, and I have absolutely no way of handling any of it. And then I've got all these voices telling me that, you know, it's not safe, these people are against you, you should be careful, you're Jewish. You know, I have all of this stuff going on in my life, and all of these voices are telling me things to do. And I'm not crazy. You know, we all have these conversations going on in my head. I'll talk a little bit more about them when I talk about the steps. But the truth of the matter is, we all have these conversations going on in our heads. The difference is when they start becoming real and you start thinking there's actual people talking to you and it's not a conversation in your head. So all these conversations are going on in my head. And I've been in business, and in 1974 I'd started my business. In 1978 I sold my business, and I had enough money not to work. I had enough money to do whatever I wanted. I had a wife at the time. I had stepchildren. I had a home here. I had a home I had two homes in England. I had a home here in Fort Lauderdale. I had two homes in England. I was living this incredible life, and I was 28 years old, approximately. Yeah, 1978. I was 31. 1947. Yeah, here we go. So I got to do the math again. But it was 1978. So I saw, you know, in 1980, 1979, I went to my doctor, and he said to me this. He said, "You got blood in your urine. Your organs are breaking down." And I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well," he said, "you got about a couple of years to live, or you got to stop drinking, one of the two." And I'd been to AA. I'd been to AA for my first meeting in 1970. I went in December of 1970. I had a roommate who was a Moroccan and a really nice guy. And every Friday he would do two things. He would go to see his therapist, And then after his therapist, I would take him in the car over to the mosque in London. And one day him and the therapist came out, and apparently he'd spent his money talking to the therapist about me, because him and the therapist came out and said, maybe you should go to AA. And I knew nothing about AA, didn't know anything, and the therapist gave me a phone number, said you should call this number and go and see these people. I thought, well, why not? And I went. And I actually liked the meeting. You know, I thought, I don't want to mix with any of these people. They're all drunks. They're nothing like me. I'm a gentleman. But these people, there's something wrong with them. But I'm okay. But you know, throughout the years, I would go as I was drinking. I would go to AA meetings every so often, just hear the stories. And so I can remember like when Bill Wilson died in 1971, and a friend of mine from Miami called. His name was James Caraway. And he said, I'm doing a eulogy for Bill Wilson. And he said, are you coming out? And I thought, well, I'm 23 years old. Why would I want to stop drinking if that's the case? And I picked up a drink. I hadn't had a drink in a couple of months at that point. And I just picked up a drink and started all over again. It took me 9 years to get sober. Because the truth of the matter is, I could stop for a day, I could stop for a week, I could even stop for a month or two or three. But the truth of the matter is, I never really stopped drinking, because I don't believe in relapse. I think either you're done or you're not. And the truth of the matter is, I was not done drinking. You know, I could calm down, I could sober up for a little while, but I just was not done drinking, and that's the bottom line. And the day I was done, I knew I was done. So I went from that doctor and I went home, and I lived in a very unusual house. I lived in a house on an island. There was nothing on the island but the house. And it was right outside of London. And I'm sitting in this house and I'm peering out the windows and I'm drinking and I'm thinking, I don't know where the wife and kids were, they were away somewhere. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm scared. I'm really, really scared, and I don't know what to do. So I called a friend of mine that I knew here in Fort Lauderdale. His name was RJ. RJ was an FBI agent. And I said, RJ, I need some help. And he said, now you figured that out. I said, I can't stop drinking. He said, yeah, I know that. I said, can you help me? He said, well, will you come to the States? And I said, yeah, I'll come to my house in Fort Lauderdale tomorrow. Now, this was Christmas Eve, and I got on a plane on Christmas Day, and I flew all day, because it's a 9-hour flight. Plus, you got to wait at the airport a couple of hours at either end, and go through customs and immigration, all that stuff. So it took me about 14 hours to get here from the time I left my house. And I was able to drink the whole way. I knew I didn't want to detox. I knew it was too dangerous for me to detox, and I got here. And when I arrived, RJ said to me, he called me and he said, because there was two planes a day, and he knew which one I was on. It was the evening plane, and he said, I'm going to come pick you up. And I said, I need about an hour to unpack. He said, no problem. I'll be there in an hour. The next thing I can remember, and for those of you, whether you're at home watching this or whether you're here, in the days when I got sober, telephones had wires attached to them. You know, and you may not remember those, but I do. And so I crawled across the floor. I'd been laying on the floor, and I crawled across the floor, and I answered the phone, and it was RJ. And he said, David, where have you been? I said, well, what do you mean, where have I been? I'm here. I'm on my living room floor. I'm looking at the ceiling fan spinning. And he said, well, he said, you know what day it is? And I said, I'm not really sure. I said, I think it's Boxing Day, which is the day after Christmas in England. And he said, no, it's January the 1st, 1980. I am a blackout drinker. I am, if you've ever seen that show, Doctor Who, that British show on TV, you know, where he turns up, I'm that time traveler. You know, I wake up somewhere, I pick up a drink, and 5 or 6 days later, I wake up somewhere not knowing where I've been, how I got there, or who I'm with. You know, I'm the guy that literally, in order to organize my drinking, I'm that kind of alcoholic that would go to all these bars in Fort Lauderdale in one section along Federal Highway, and had arrangements with certain bartenders, and they would take my car keys and my wallet, send me home in a cab, and when I would wake up the next day, there'd be a note in my pocket, and I'd go back and pick up my phone, because I knew the kind of drinking that I do. I'm that kind of alcoholic. And I'm the kind of alcoholic that, even knowing that, thought I was having fun, didn't want to stop. But I knew enough to know that I would probably kill somebody if I was driving. whether it be me or somebody else. I knew enough that I was in a foreign country for me at that time that I didn't want to get arrested in Fort Lauderdale for drunk driving. I knew enough about that, but I didn't know how to stop drinking. So RJ came and picked me up that day and took me to my first real meeting. And I say it's my first real meeting because even though I'd been to AA, I'd never really participated or been involved in it. And we started working steps. You all know the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? They're the same steps as most of the other 12-step organizations used, except for maybe the first step and the third tradition. So the first step, the steps go very simply. Step 1 is I'm screwed up and I can't fix me. Step 2 is you're all human beings, you're all screwed up like me, so you can't fix me either. That was a problem because I expected when they said, oh, the group of drunks, GOD is a group of drunks, the people in the rooms, they'll help you stay sober. They were all relapsing. How are they going to keep me sober? Step 3 is God could and would if he was sought. Steps 4 through 7 is clean house. Why would God want to live in this house that I created? It's a mess. Have you ever seen that program Hoarders? I got piles inside this house. I know what's on every pile. I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to let you anywhere near my piles. I'm going to hang on to them for dear life. Steps 8 and 9 is make restitution. Nobody wanted to hear I was sorry. They wanted me to go there and talk to them and say, this is what I did. What would you like me to do to make it right? Step 10 is how I practice 4 through 9 every day. 11 is how I practice 2 and 3 every day. And 12 is how I practice 1 every day, because when I do something like this, which is a 12-step in essence, I have to admit I'm an alcoholic for you to identify with me. And I have to admit I'm powerless over alcohol. And the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous says this, and it's different to nearly every other fellowship, by one word. It says, having had a spiritual having had a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps. Most of the others say as having a result of the steps. The only result of the steps is a spiritual awakening for me. And that's exactly what happened. It's not about stopping drinking. I was already sober. In fact, my sponsor told me, I don't want you to pray to be sober. You are sober. I want you to pray for God to put somebody in your life that will help you stay sober on a daily basis. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message. The message is that God could and would if he was sought, to alcoholics, and to carry and these principles in all our affairs. Meaning, it's not just in my drinking, it's not just in my drugging, it's in my family, it's in my friends, it's in my business, it's everything I touch. I had terrible relationships. This is a program of relationships. My relationships were horrible. I had a horrible relationship with alcohol. I had a terrible relationship with my friends. I had a terrible relationship in business. I had a terrible relationship with my family. They told me, don't make any big decisions. I got divorced the first year. I didn't think that was a big decision. And that was one of my emotional bottoms, because after stopping drinking, I really started hitting bottom. I didn't know until I hit rock bottom that the rock was God. But when I stopped drinking and finished working the steps, I wasn't at bottom yet. I still had a couple of emotional bottoms to go before I really hit bottom. First bottom was at the end of the first year when I got divorced. I came into this program with money, enough money not to have to work the rest of my life. 3 homes, cars, family, and 1 year, Christmas, 1980, 1 year after I got sober, I was living in one room in Oakland Park with a mattress on the floor and a bicycle, and everything else was gone. Because I didn't know how to make decisions sober, so getting divorced was probably not the wisest decision when you're getting sober. I was advised against it, but who listens to their sponsor, right? Well, I listen now. If my sponsor says jump, I say how high, what direction? That was my first emotional bottom. And that's when I said to you that I learned that if I don't get on my knees and ask God for help, he'll bring me to my knees. The second emotional bottom was 4 years sober. when I got arrested in a major bust all the way up and down the east coast of the United States. And fortunately that was taken care of with minimal consequences. But I can tell you this, if you'd have told me that I would get arrested 4 years sober, I would have told you, you're insane. I'm working my program. I'm going to meetings. I got a sponsor. I'm doing all these things that they told me. I'm not drinking, I'm not drugging. I've got sponsees. I'm working my program. I get on my knees every morning. I ask God to put somebody in my life. I do all of these things. There's only one thing I lack, which I still struggle with today. And I'm struggling right now as I stand on this stage talking to you guys. It's humility. My ego wants to take over. My ego wants to take over. You know that acronym, edging God out? I have to wake up every morning and I remind myself when I look in the mirror, and I do this every morning, I remind myself that the difference between God and me is God is not under the delusion that he's me.
That's good.
Because I believe that. I have to fight that on a daily basis. You know, my sobriety date is January 1st, 1980, so I'm 41 plus years sober, and you think I've got this. It's not how it works. I've got this if I get up this morning and I do everything I'm supposed to do. So one of the things I do every day is make my bed. I'm not going to tell you the story because it's not an appropriate story to tell right now, but there's a reason that I make my bed every day. But what I can tell you is I was on a sales trip with somebody and my sponsor said, get on your knees and pray. And I said, I'm Jewish, I don't like to get on my knees. And he says, well, make your bed every day. And I made my bed that day. And from that day on, I've made my bed every day. I've made my bed every day. Even when I'm in a hotel, I make my bed. And the days that I don't, I suffer from it. I notice, because that's how I start my disciplines off for my day. Because if I miss out my disciplines, my recovery goes into the toilet, and then I follow it. It doesn't take much. I am one bad decision away from a drink. That's it. I'm one bad decision away from a drink. I may not drink today if I make that bad decision, but I'll drink at some point. And I'm not foolish enough to believe that won't happen. I can tell you this, that when I worked my steps and I did my 4 steps, I talked about the IRA and the bombing and my mother and all of these different things that were relevant in my 5th step. In my 5th step with my sponsor. And what I would tell you is this, that God stepped into my life. And I was able to forgive complete races of people, Germans, the Irish, some of the British people that I knew. I was able to let all of that go. To the point where my previous sponsor, who just died, I've outlived 3 sponsors, so be careful if you ever get to sponsor me. Make sure you're in good health and got plenty of insurance. But my last sponsor, who passed away after 17 years of being my sponsor, he was an Irish, passport-carrying Irish Roman Catholic. Now, how does that happen to a British Jew who's been at war with Ireland for I don't know how many years, who's been blown up by a bomb? How does that happen? It happens because God steps in and he makes it happen. I'm just going to close with a couple of things about recovery. There's an organization called Kairos. My sponsor was an FBI agent, I mentioned that. And he said to me one day, you know, I can't go into prisons, it's a security risk. He said, I want you to take AA meetings into prisons. And I did that for 10 years. I would drive from Fort Lauderdale to Belgrade every Friday night for an hour and a half each way, and took an AA meeting for 10 years into Belgrade prison, which, for those of you who don't know, is a men's maximum security prison. And I made many good friends there. And one of the life-changing experiences for me was doing 5th steps with guys who can't read and write. Because there are many of them in prison. Some of them doing life sentences for murder, some of them doing 2 and 3 life sentences. And when I would write out their fourth step, as they were telling me their fourth step, so they could do the fourth and fifth step combined, they would speak it, I would write it, and I would show them this fifth step written out. They would get on their knees and cry. These are stone cold killers who had been pumping iron day after day. And it was just a life-changing experience for them and me. And then there was the Kairos prison ministry. I became part of I went to Via de Cristo, I became part of the Kairos prison ministry. I did many talks on the Kairos prison ministry, and I got involved in Belgrade there as well, with Kairos. And for those of you who don't know, we do a 4-day retreat. It starts on Thursday, ends on Sunday, and we go into the prisons for probably 18 hours of the day. And we take food in there, and we live with the guys about 18 hours a day. And we change lives, one person at a time in that prison. And it's an extraordinary, extraordinary experience. And the reason I did that was because that time, 4 years into my sobriety, when I was sitting in jail for 3 weeks, waiting to be bonded out, the rabbi never came by. But a minister did, and he handed me a Bible, and he prayed with me, and that was life-changing. And that was one of those life-changing experiences that I said, where you get humility and you realize that something is different. When you realize that there's more to life than just what goes on between my ears, because this is a great entertainment center right here. You know, and alcohol, you know, alcohol saved my life. Make no mistake, alcohol was God in my life. It saved my life up until the point where it stopped working. Because one of the things that shut those voices down, that I talked about in the very beginning, was alcohol. It would numb it down. And I'll close with this. I said to my sponsor one day something about the voices, and he said, well, how many, we were working the steps, he said, how many are there? And I said, I don't know. I said, there's one that wants to go to work, one that wants to take a shower, one that wants to stay in bed, one that wants to eat breakfast, one wants to go to the gym. He said, well, how many? I said, I don't know, half a dozen. He said, bring them all, they've all got to do the steps. and I'm going to tell you something. What's extraordinary about that is that we worked the steps. The voices went away. As I got sober, the voices went away. And the more sober I got, the more the one voice came back. And the one voice tells me, reach out and help another alcoholic, and God will turn up. I used to go into meetings with a guy in New York, and I will close with this, because this man, this was another humbling experience for me. I lived in New York for a short period of time after Hurricane Andrew. And for those of you that don't realize who you are as alcoholics, every one of your liabilities, every one of these character defects you have will become your greatest asset. Because when Hurricane Andrew hit, the military came to find me, and they asked me to join the commanding general's office. And I was the civilian that was down in Homestead helping run the whole deal down there. And it was because of all of the liabilities I had that they said were assets that could save lives. And every one of you has assets that will change lives. I know that Pastor Lyle has the ministry down in Haiti, and all his liabilities that he goes down there with can help change lives. That's what we do. We turn things around. God turns us around. In step 3, God talks about, we talk about, we stood at the turning point. And when I do this, when I turn, not spin, like it says in the Bible, in the big book, it talks about the whirling dervishes, but when I turn around 180 degrees, the God that was picking me up in the gutter and pushing me back on my feet is now in front of me, between me and a drink. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is about. So I would go to this meeting with this man, and he would turn up in a t-shirt and shorts and a pair of sneakers, and then one day he turned up in a fireman's uniform, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. Must be Halloween or something. And he never said anything, and he went, after the meeting he left. His name was Michael. And a couple of weeks later he turned up in monk's habits. Turned out his name is Michael Judge. I knew Michael. He was 20 years sober. He was a monk. And Michael gave his life in 9/11. He was the priest that died in 9/11, giving last rites to firemen. And what I would tell you is, I once said to him, why? Why are you in AA? You're a priest. Why would you need AA? And one of the things that Michael said to me was this. He said, you know, in church, you're in community with other people. That's religion. He said, but spirituality is from within. He said, and AA gives me spirituality. Church gives me religion. And with that, I'm going to close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you again, and thank you, Rebecca, for joining them. We normally do break out into groups, but again, today we're going to have some food and fellowship. But before we do, is a time for anniversaries and crosses. So those of you that don't know,